Welcome back. We're talking about China's growing leadership in the global fight against climate change. Still with us, Ranping Song is with the World Resources Institute. David Livingston is with the Energy and Climate Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Kari Fulton is a climate justice advocate. Let's get back to the discussion. And Ranping, China has stopped the construction of something like 100, little more than 100 coal-fired power plants. It wants to invest something like $360 billion in renewable energy. There's some ambitious targets that have been set. Is China going to meet those targets?
Oh, I actually have no doubt China is going to meet those targets because China, we actually did conduct analysis and started to check China's performance on climate energy policies over the last 5 years, and we actually make projections. I think we're pretty confident China's on track to meet and beat those targets. So the real issue is actually whether this can be more sustainable, over the short-term commitment, but rather have an underlying transformation of the economy, coming from a more intense, energy-intensive, pollution-intensive industries, shift to more service-oriented or more smart industries that actually making sense over the long term. So that is what China is trying to achieve, and that is the hard part.
Kari, we sometimes forget that there are two sets of very important people who play a role in climate change. One are the governments that push that change. The other, of course, are the people who live in these societies. But let's look at governments. How important are governments in making this change?
Well, I think governments play a very large role, but the government is nothing without the people who put them in place. Right. So the people right now, I think one thing that's important to know is that more so than a lot of people think, there are people in the United States that realize that climate change is real and that it is an issue and that we need to be thinking about how we develop our future. And so on a local level, whether it's our towns, our cities, our states, you see real big things happening. You see a lot of movement building towards how we build a more sustainable future and a more resilient future. So I think when we think about how we develop and educate people, especially even young people, in the education that they get in their elementary schools and grade schools, then they go on and become the government leaders. They go on to elect those government leaders. So the government is only as strong as the people. And that's, I think, one of the things that's most important for people to remember. The government plays a major role, but the people have the right to change what the government is doing.
Anand, I think this is actually a great point, and if I can just add on to what Kari said, in the context of the U.S. federal system, which can be a bit complex and opaque at times, but in the end is a really interesting balance of different powers between the federal government and the people via their state governments. Look at the state of California, for example. Regardless of what the Trump administration does on the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as all of the various domestic policy mechanisms meant to implement it, California is going to go ahead with what's some of the most aggressive climate policies, not only in the United States, but also in the world. It's the largest economy in the United States. It's the second largest greenhouse gas producer in the United States amongst all 50 states. It's the fourth largest producer of oil, the fifth largest producer of electricity. And if it were a country, California would be the sixth largest economy in the world, about on par with France. So we can't forget that even if you see very little action on the federal level, you're still going to have some gains made by coalitions of states, coalitions of the willing, if you will, that are willing to demonstrate leadership where climate policies and going out a little bit in a leadership role aligns with their own self-interest.
Yeah. And Ranping, what are opportunities for places like California, to deal with a country like China?
Actually, California stands to benefit a lot, from engaging with China. California, of course, we know that renewable energy is large there. China is the biggest market there. It's mutual benefits. Actually, as we speak, there's actually already government-to-government cooperation initiative between the state of California and different provinces of China. There's a government cooperation initiative between New York to provinces and cities in China, and also even from a business perspective, like a Republican state, like red state, like Texas, where they actually have really good success, a lot of success in scaling up their renewable energy. They have really good success about managing their electricity grid. There's a lot of business, a lot of technology understanding, and those businesses can potentially pose to benefit to capture the China market. There's a lot of lessons learned as well. One of the things that how U.S. managed to do those things. They be able to install quite large amount of renewable energy and then use them, which is, is a combination of technology and, smart regulation, which China would like to and love to be learning from and then cooperate.
Kari, is there any way of telling where U.S. public opinion lies on this issue of climate change?
Definitely. The best way to think about it is how many people are completely irritated by the fact that we're going backwards. Now, you have some people who have real legitimate concerns about losing their livelihoods when it comes to coal and it comes to different forms of energy sources. But then you also have people who have lived through those health issues, who have lived through black lung. You have people who are seeing the benefits of the green job industry and the green infrastructure that we're building and that we're creating. I know that here in Washington, D.C., we have a whole sustainable initiative. We're partnering with mayors from around the world to create real sustainable initiatives and to become one of the most sustainable cities in the world. Beyond that, April 29th, there are going to be thousands of people in the street here in Washington, D.C. for the People's Climate March. From all over the country and the world, there will be sister marches as well. And because people are saying, this is ridiculous. We need to be thinking about our climate. We need to be thinking about what we're doing for our environment on a real level. So I think that's helpful. I think even thinking about how much we've progressed over the last administration and seeing that people are like, hey, actually, let's continue on this on a state level, on a local level. Let's continue building our recycling programs, our composting, different things on that nature.
David, if the United States withdraws from the Paris Agreement, does it also lose the opportunity to sell its ideas or to engage with, sell its technology to the developing world?
It certainly loses some opportunities to have market leadership and to set standards, which is going to be increasingly important in a space where new technologies are entering into markets, right. And there are no standards, to dictate whether you use this sort of vehicle charging technology or this sort of vehicle charging technology. Now, if you're a market that signals that cares about climate change, it views addressing climate change as in its own self-interest, and you have got a stable and long-term policy framework, capital will be attracted. You're going to get investment. You're going to see companies set up solar manufacturing here. You're going to see R&D happen here. You're going to see companies trying to find educated workers and hire them right out of university here. If you don't have that, you'll see private capital look elsewhere. That's the danger of signaling, even if it's largely symbolic, of signaling that there's going to be a period of great uncertainty and volatility in the United States. So when it comes to setting standards for renewable energy, for electric vehicle charging technology, for interoperability standards, which is, I understand, an unsexy, but ultimately an extremely important area of work to be done in this new energy economy, the danger here is that withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, particularly when taken in the context of our previously having withdrawn from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, puts the United States in a position where inexplicably it seems to be handing a leadership role over to China at a time when China's happy to take it, but perhaps is not really even in a position to do much with it, in the same way that the United States was only a year ago.
Ranping, let's look then at a role for the European Union. David spoke about that a moment ago, but if China is looking to take a lead in climate change efforts, can it form some kind of alliance with the European Union? Let's take a listen to the European Climate Commissioner, Miguel Arias-Cañete.
What is very clear is that while some look back, the European Union and China will look ahead. Because for us, the Paris Agreement is not a bad deal, it's a good deal. It is not a blast from the past, but it's a promise for a better future.
So can we see some kind of alliance between the EU and China to keep this Paris Accord very much alive?
Of course, it's common sense, right? Yeah. If you want to find a strong alliance from developed countries to make sure that this go forward. But let's make sure that it's actually no longer only about developing countries and working with developed countries. Actually, it's a good opportunity for South-South cooperation, for developing countries working with other developing countries, for China working with other African countries, for Southeast Asian countries. There are actually a lot of opportunities that China can take to utilize this climate change as a way to leverage its soft power, as well as to influence how economy being built, how infrastructure being financed, and what kind of energy it's going to use. China actually, as we speak, we are developing this Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank there's a new investment, new development bank. This new development banks is already being driven by China, trying to set a new development agenda. And this is mostly providing a good opportunity for China to utilize these instruments and to channel their influence and to grow the economy.
Do you think China could play a role in influencing whatever decision the United States takes?
Well, of course. I mean, it's all about a lot of different players, right? So, of course, I do believe that China will have a role to play because any decision we make will have to be listened to multiple players, including international, voices.